From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. As the summer heats up, is it hitting crop conditions? That's as the big acreage debate is also heating up. Seeing every weed in a field, no matter how small.
On a couple fields that I was spraying last week, we saw, I think on the one field I was seeing 26% area applied, and then on another field it was around 43%.
How one dairy farmer cut his crop chemical usage by 60%. The Fed stays the course on interest rates, but is agriculture heading for a recession?
I think the ag economy is a little bit a different story than the general economy.
A one-on-one with the president of the Chicago Fed this weekend.
U.S. Farm Report, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when the name on a cap matches the power of one's purpose. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Now for the news. Summer officially arriving on Thursday, but summer heat started arriving days earlier, and in many parts of the country, it is sticking around. Take a look at this map. You can see in purple where extreme heat is forecasted for this weekend, with moderate in orange. But as you can see, much of the country dealing with moderate heat. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says temperatures could reach up to 95 degrees, but he says there will be some areas where temps do exceed 100 degrees. What could this mean for farmers and crops? Well, Rippey says the primary area of concern right now is really in the south.
Notably, corn is starting to silk across the deep south, and over the next few days, this hot weather will accelerate crop development. So June is a bad time for a heat wave for corn across the southern United States. That is something we'll have to watch.
However, Rippey says the further north you go, including the Midwest, he says hotter temperatures this time of year should not have a detrimental impact on spring planted crops. But the concern does not end there. There are also deadly wildfires along with flooding from this year's first named storm. Tropical Storm Alberto, the first named storm of this year's Atlantic hurricane season, brought heavy rain and a massive storm surge north to coastal cities like Galveston as well as Corpus Christi. Alberto spreading rain across much of Texas and also into New Mexico, where it was hoped the rain could help crews battling this. Devastating wildfires. Tens of thousands of acres in the state have been charred so far, along with hundreds of homes and businesses in Ruidoso. That's one of the villages where residents were forced to evacuate.
We don't know what's going to happen with our home.
We're in a really severe drought, but with the high temperatures, low humidities, and then we get wind, we're getting explosive wildfires in areas that traditionally wouldn't be in that condition.
The pace of these severe weather alerts has FEMA worried about funding. The agency's major disaster relief fund could be in the red by the end of the summer, marking a shortfall of $1.3 billion come August, according to a May report. So far this year, the U.S. has been hit by 11 extreme weather disasters that each had costs north of $1 billion. Well, we'll have to see what kind of an impact the heat and rain have on the next crop progress report and crop conditions. As of Monday, USDA reported that the nation's corn conditions, 72%, it was rated good to excellent. That's down 2 points from last week. 70% of the U.S. soybean crop is rated good to excellent, also down 2 points from the previous week. Mexico's plan to ban imports of genetically modified corn is set for a hearing next week in Mexico City. The U.S. argues Mexico's measures violate the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which mandates science-based food safety measures. The U.S. Trade Representative claims Mexico has not proven any harm from genetically modified corn. Mexico, however, argues there are health risks from consuming large amounts of genetically modified white corn not accounted for in U.S. studies. Well, there's no doubt it heated up this weekend as we officially welcome summer. More heat, of course, is on the way, but how hot? It's a check of your forecast coming up next.
U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. Maximize baleage yield with less time and effort with the LW1100 line wrap bale wrapper. You can wrap round or square bales, and the automatic operating mode allows for a one-person operation.
Well, heavy rain falling in parts of the country this week. Oklahoma Mesonet reporting that heavy rains fell in Hooker, Goodwell, and Beaver, Oklahoma on Wednesday, with totals hitting their 1,000-year rainfall mark. Meteorologists reporting Hooker broke its all-time daily rainfall record in less than 3 hours, getting a total of 6.9 inches of rain. Goodwell recording 7.5 inches of rain in just 8 hours, and it was still raining on Thursday. The area not used to seeing that much rain in a short amount of time, with Guymon, Oklahoma usually only averaging 20 inches of rainfall all year. Well, from those heavy rains to heat, our new meteorologist, Jack Van Meter, has a check of your forecast this weekend. Jack?
Yeah, the drought monitor just came out earlier today, so let's go ahead and see those conditions. Now, we can see the only little changes that we've seen with our drought monitor is because of that heat dome that's been set up for much of the central east part of our country. We can see just those drier conditions have moved in, but we still see, sadly, down in southeastern New Mexico, those extreme and some even exceptional droughts down there. It's just been so dry down there. We're not getting a lot of moisture down there, and also parts of the Rio Grande is also being very dry. Up north, though, in the Panhandle, also seeing that moderate to a little bit of extreme drought for sure. Middle part of the country, we can see those high plains fairly doing well on moisture, not much to see, but again, those new additions of those drier conditions moving into Illinois and also parts of Iowa too. Zooming out there again, seeing that fuller picture though. Estimated rainfall this next week, again, not going to be a lot. We can see again that heat dome is really keeping us from seeing a lot of beneficial rain, just those spotty showers here and there. Can't see down in New Orleans though, seeing quite a bit of rain coming up. You can see just a little bit as well. Again, everything just going over that heat dome. Thankfully, that will be breaking down later this weekend. That is very good news. Sunday, we can still see large ridging over the central part of the country. As I put this in motion, we can see that the ridges start to break down and actually bring in a good amount of moisture. Think of this as a river, just bringing down a lot of precipitation down, and hopefully the goal is this week that we can actually start to see this moisture start to lessen those drier conditions and hopefully make sure that those sudden drought conditions aren't going to be a problem as well. We do have a big system coming through, bringing a cold front. That'll be later this week.
Well, speaking of heat, the acreage debate is heating up before next week. What are the biggest wild cards that could create fireworks in the markets? Krista Swanson and Scott Brown join me next. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Well, as promised, Scott Brown as well as Krista Swanson joining us this weekend. And Krista, you're in D.C. this week, so we're going to get into some of that a little bit later. But what we're really keeping an eye on right now is the Acreage Report next week. Scott, the Ag Economist Monthly Monitor, you got those results back this week. It shows that 60% of economists think that corn acreage is going to fall in the 90 to 91 million acre range. Soybeans, 60% of economists think 87 to 88 million. USDA in March was at 90 million for corn, 86.5 for soybeans. So not huge shifts is what economists at least are expecting this next week.
Yeah, that's right, Tyne. I think in both cases, though, we're talking about the economists saying there'll be more corn and soybeans both planted. So we'll gain a little bit of maybe what we lost in terms of principal crop acreage from the prospective plantings report back when we see the June acreage report. At least that's what the economists that were polled this month say.
Okay, Krista, so let's say that USDA's report next week comes out at the top end of those estimates, okay? And that we do have 91 million acres of corn. Right now, when you look at the demand scenario, can the balance sheet handle 1 million more acres of corn?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it really depends on where yield comes in, and that's a big question at this point in the growing season. I mean, right now, USDA is projecting a 181 bushel per acre yield. And, just as a reminder, last year, the 177.3 bushel per acre yield that we had was a record yield. So we're talking about, not only a yield that's 4 bushels per acre above that. So I think that there's some question as to if we can actually achieve that level. And certainly if we can get a yield that's a little bit lower than that, not that we want that, but when we look at those 91 million acres, if we had a yield at 178, which would still be a record, just edging out over where we were last year, there is a way to end up with carryout below 2 billion bushels. So I mean, I think that it's the combination of acres and also where yield comes in. This year got off to a great start in some places, but we've had some rainfall that's brought some relief from drought that we experienced last year, but also in some places there's just been too much rain. I was just on a meeting earlier this morning, and someone from Minnesota noted that they're becoming the land of 10,000 lakes after the heavy rainfall here over the past week and more rain in store. And so I definitely think that there's some areas of the country where maybe we'll have some of those yield impacts due to weather.
But Scott, right now, I mean, yes, the market's focused on weather, but really focused on this acreage report next week. You've been watching this market for a long time. We know this can be a big market mover. What are some potential fireworks that producers need to be cautious of possibly out of this report next week?
Yeah, Todd, I think if we get a growth in both corn and soybean planted acres, it will be a negative for markets. At least they'll respond negatively in the short run. So I would encourage folks to think about whether there's any risk management they might want to do here before the report comes out. Hard to tell at this point which side of that. The economists saying more acreage of both corn and soybeans. We could get a surprise on the other side as well. It's going to be one of the bigger movers. And generally, I keep saying, I think we plant more acres. We'll see what happens on the yield side. All of this could continue to put pressure on prices to move lower as we get closer to fall harvest.
Okay, real quick, Krista, we asked this question of economists about that 6 million of the acres that we potentially lost in that March report. Where did that 6 million acres go?
So kind of going along with what Scott just pointed out, if we pick up 1 million on corn and we pick up 1 million on soybeans, I definitely think that we'll see some of that come down. I mean, there's also been, there was the open enrollment in CRP. I know, just speaking on our farm in particular, we have quite a few acres that we farmed last year that are in CRP for this year. And so, that's one potential place. But I do think that maybe we could see that 6 billion come down a little bit as we maybe see a few more corn and soybean acres.
There's a lot of things on the demand front and the potential impacts on demand that we need to talk about. We'll take a quick break and then we'll ask Krista and Scott about that next. Welcome back. Scott Brown and Krista Swanson joining us for our marketing roundtables this weekend. All right, Scott, we talked about the acreage estimates out of that Ag Economist's monthly monitor, but you also asked the economists, other than weather and acreage, what are the potential biggest market movers over the next 6 months? What do economists say?
Number one at the top of the list of almost all these commodities is, of course, weather, as we've talked about on the yield side. I think some are seeing some demand weakness, soybean prices in particular, seeing some other veg oils substitutes entering the picture. Maybe Brazilian supplies are bigger on the soybean side. Strong dollar continues to be important in terms of our ability to move product out of the United States. Take cotton, for example. Lack of China trade was mentioned in that. But those are so a lot of the things that seem to be slightly more negative as we look at this month's monitor. And when you look at the survey results, that comes through with almost all these commodities, with the exception of cattle. Survey respondents saying we're slightly more pessimistic this month than we were last month.
All right, let's talk about the demand front, Krista, okay? Because we know Mexico and the U.S. will meet next week in Mexico City over Mexico's ban of genetically modified white corn in tortillas, and really talking about how that impacts us down the road, okay? So we're seeing Mexico come to the U.S. and possibly will be our top trading partner this year. So have we seen that ban on genetically modified white corn? Have we seen that impact corn demand?
Yeah, so it has impacted white corn demand specifically. And the reason that when we look at overall corn demand and we still see Mexico as being a big buyer is because white corn is such a small percentage of our total corn. So if you look specifically at white corn exports, you do see that impact. When we talk about the total corn complex, though, Mexico's had a drought that has reduced their production. They already consume quite a bit more than they produce, so they tend to be an importer. But this year they've had to import more than normal, and so that's where we're seeing those big buys coming in from Mexico, and where that's really boosted U.S. corn exports this year.
Krista, also news this week, and you're in Washington, but NCGA, along with Farm Bureau and other groups, filing a second lawsuit related to the EPA tailpipe emissions rules. So when you look at that rule, what implications could it have for corn demand here in the U.S.?
Yeah, so this lawsuit is related to, in March, the Environmental Protection Agency released its final 2027 to 2032 emission standards for light and medium duty vehicles. And then they came out with another ruling specific to heavy duty vehicles. But the problem here is that it's really just a one size fits all solution that with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's exclusively through electric vehicles and ignoring, the available solution that biofuels provide. And so, it's talking about an increase from about 1% of vehicles today that are electric vehicles to 67% for that light and medium duty by 2032. So if we think about what that means in terms of fuel use and therefore ethanol use, and then down the chain to corn use, definitely a big impact. I use the numbers that EPA put out in that rule and determined that by 2041, that would translate to 1 billion bushels less of corn demand. And that number continues to increase from there on out annually. So that's an annual number. And I've seen some other studies that make different assumptions on fleet turnover that show that 1 billion, where we hit that 1 billion threshold of loss to corn demand, actually happens even sooner than that. So, I think definitely a big concern.
All right, from corn to cattle, Scott, I know you mentioned cattle earlier, but ProFarmer reporting that packers were actively raising cash cattle bids in the northern market in an attempt to obtain supplies as cattle numbers were tight. And we just heard of some phenomenal bids out there, but also ProFarmer saying so far feedlots are passing, suggesting that there could be another significant increase in the average cash price this week. I mean, my goodness, how high are these cash prices going to go?
It's hard to keep suggesting higher prices when we're already at record levels, Tyne. But when you look at where we're at in terms of cattle inventory, cattle numbers, we're only going to get tighter. It reminds me when USDA tells us their 2025 estimate for beef production is another greater than 1 billion pound decline, that we're not done getting tighter. Now, I keep saying I'm not sure we're done with record prices. That I think all hinges on demand staying strong for U.S. beef, especially here in the United States.
All right, Scott Brown, thank you so much. Krista, thank you for taking a break. I know you're busy in Washington, D.C. this week, so thanks for taking a break and chatting with us. All right, we need to take a quick break, and then we'll check in with Machinery Pete for Tractor Tales next.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. Come along with me to Texas this week. We're going to check out a John Deere MT and a few implements.
We have a 51 MT John Deere that was given to me by his uncle because I helped him with his. He got too old to drive, so I took him to get his groceries and pay his bills and this, that, and the other. And he asked Alan, he says, I need to do something for her. Do you think she'd want that old MT out there in the tractor shed? And he said, yeah, I think she'd like to have it pretty good.
But we got the tractor and we got all the implements. He bought the tractor in '51 to farm cotton, and he bought it as a unit. The tractor, the cultivators, the planters, the bedders, and the number 5 sickle mower. And we got the whole package. It had been working on a farm for 61 years. Yes, I grew up on the tractor. I've got scars on my butt to prove it. I could pull into a field of 20 acres and lay it all down, and still have plenty of daylight left. Of course, now they would do that in a matter of hours, 2 or 3 hours. But back then, this was a mowing tractor. I sandblasted the tractor and sandblasted everything, and then I started painting it and went back together that way. It took me 2 years on the tractor, and then a year on the cultivators and a year on the planters. Goes to tractor shows, and that's all.
She's retired like me. I like her because she's in the family, and she's going to stay in the family. She's going to nieces and nephews after this.
Thanks, Greg. Well, from where interest rates are heading to even why inflation has been so hard for the Federal Reserve to control. It's all one-on-one with the president of the Chicago Fed next.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Well, heading into this year, many economists and analysts thought we could see 2 to 3 interest rate cuts this year, but halfway into 2024, and the Federal Reserve has not budged. The June Ag Economist Monthly Monitor, just released this week, asked economists how many rate cuts, if any, we will see this year. 73% said 1, 18% think 2 rate cuts are likely, and 9% say 0. While inflation and higher for longer interest rates are hitting some industries within agriculture especially hard. So is the ag economy heading toward a recession? I had the chance to talk one-on-one with the head of the Chicago Federal Reserve last week, and while he couldn't tell me how many rate cuts we will see this year, he says there are some warning signs they're watching when it comes to agriculture. And that's this week's Farm Journal report.
Today, the FOMC decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings.
Just last week, the Federal Reserve stayed the course, leaving interest rates unchanged. The news didn't come as a surprise to many, as taming sticky inflation has proved to be a challenge, despite promising inflation data also out last week.
Inflation has eased substantially from a peak of 7% to 2.7%, but is still too high.
On the heels of the Fed's announcement last week, I had the chance to speak one-on-one with Austin Goolsbee, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. That was during the Iowa Farm Bureau's Economic Summit. He wouldn't tie the Fed's hands on how many rate cuts we could see this year, but he says they are making some headway on taming inflation.
We got excellent news, at least for 1 month, on inflation for this month. That inflation really, at least for a month, was coming in right around the target of where we want it to be. But that follows on failures on inflation, so we have to make progress on inflation before you're going to see rates coming down to something like normal levels.
Goolsbee told me he doesn't see inflation going back to levels pre-pandemic. So what's driving it? Well, that's also complicated.
There's 2 parts of the inflation, and one is it just got way too high. And then the second is it's proved more persistent and stickier than what we thought. I think a big component, and you see that in the ag economy here in Iowa, has been input costs and the supply side damage. Some of it came from COVID, but that deterioration led to a lot of the inflation, and as that's been healing, that's allowed the inflation rate to come down without a recession.
But the ag economy and the U.S. economy are currently on different paths. Just this month, John Deere announcing layoffs and early retirements, with more job cuts possibly on the way. Last week, Bridgestone Americas announcing it's laying off 118 workers at its Des Moines, Iowa plant, citing lower demand for ag tires.
I think the ag economy is a little bit a different story than the general economy. And partly we're readjusting. We just went through 3+ years that were extremely unusual and in many ways very strong for the ag economy. So part of this is getting back onto a more normal set of circumstances, and we're going to have to adjust to that. Part of this, if you look at Deere and durable goods makers, in the strongest years, a lot of farmers bought a lot of equipment, so just the durable goods cycle, there's not as much demand. It's kind of slowed. And for sure, high rates don't make that any easier.
The Chicago Fed also produces an ag letter looking at credit conditions across their geography. And in May, the letter showed that district agricultural credit conditions weakened a bit during the first quarter of 2024. Repayment rates for non-real estate farm loans were lower in January through March period of 2024 compared with a year earlier. And in the first quarter of 2024, demand for non-real estate loans relative to a year ago was up for the second consecutive quarter.
Right now, repayment rates, if you look at delinquencies, they're rising. They're not to levels that you would call a recession, but they're rising. So I think that's an area of vulnerability.
Well, the June Ag Economist's monthly monitor, which I mentioned earlier, asked the nearly 70 economists what are the most positive and negative aspects of the outlook of the ag economy. Geopolitics, as well as Chinese demand, were some of the negatives. U.S. trade policy and current export outlook, those were all headwinds that economists mentioned. But as for the positive, adverse world weather boosting U.S. exports, strong financial balance sheets at the farm level, and farmers eager to adapt to stay in business, those top the list. Well, speaking of exports, Mexico could become the United States' top trading partner this year, beating out China. A glimpse of ag around the world is next. Now for a glimpse of ag around the world, there could be a new top buyer of U.S. ag goods this year as USDA expects China to fall to the number 3 spot, and it's Mexico that could climb to the top spot. Canada could actually rise to number 2. USDA's ERS's latest report on the outlook for agricultural trade points to a growing trade deficit. The U.S. ag trade deficit is expected to increase to $32 billion in 2024, an increase of $1.5 billion from February. China's expected to fall to $27.7 billion, which would take them to the 3rd largest buyer of U.S. ag goods. But exports to Mexico are booming, rising $300 million this year to $28.7 billion. Some of that is thanks to record red meat exports to Mexico. But as Dan Holstrom, CEO of U.S. Meat Export Federation, tells us, that's in spite of a growing U.S. ag trade deficit overall. From growing demand at convenience stores to an expanding appetite for different cuts of red meat, Mexico has become the number 1 importer of U.S. meat.
Total exports in April were almost 288,000 metric tons. This is the largest volume and value month for pork globally since 2021. And as you said, Mexico is one of the primary drivers. And we had a record month in April, both volume and value for the country of Mexico, which is really something when you consider the record last year that was set in October. This is really a good thing.
Dan Holstrom, CEO of U.S. Meat Export Federation, spent the week in Mexico City, Mexico last week. It was the Red Meat Trade Symposium, but also a chance to visit with the United States' top trading partner.
But the percentage of non-ham items being exported are increasing from the U.S. Pork shoulders, picnics from the shoulder, ribs, butts, loins. Loins are another big one. So this is a significant development. They're reaching out. They're expanding the merchandising opportunities, whether it's retail or food service, looking at some of these other cuts.
USMEF says in April, U.S. pork exports reached the highest volume and value since May of 2021, and U.S. beef exports hit a 10-month high. That growth was fueled by Mexico, with pork exports up 14% year over year.
We're hitting on all cylinders in the food service sector. That has been going on for more than a year post-COVID, and it continues to be the case. You look at the retail sector, broad-based growth there, convenience stores.
For a country known for buying mostly hams, Holstrom says that demand is also changing.
And we can't forget about variety meats, which is important not only on the pork side, but the beef side as well. Mexico is one of the largest destinations in the world for pork and beef variety meats. And a lot of segments within Mexico, the center of the plate item is not is not pork loin or beef ribeye. It is variety meats like tripe. So we got to keep that in mind.
As Mexico buys more volume, when it comes to beef, it's coming at a higher price.
It wasn't that long ago, you'd think of Mexico as really as a price shopper on beef. You know, prices got too high, they just would back off. That is not the case. I mean, the cutout goes higher. You know, you've got chuck roll prices that are pretty high, and they continue to buy. And I think this is a sign that the consumer globally, even in Mexico, understands our value and our high quality, high grading value that we have on the beef side, which is unique in the global marketplace.
Mexico continues to ramp up demand, but how long can it last? Well, Hallstrom says it's a question he asks weekly.
And I keep asking the question, when will this demand, when will this allocated gross income for food slow down, and we'll see the impact for beef and pork demand in places like Mexico? And I keep getting told by our staff that demand is still good. So I think there's a real good chance that things continue on this track. Will it be record breaking? It may or may not be, but in general, demand is very solid.
All right, that's a glimpse of ag around the world. When we come back, an exclusive interview with U.S. Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack. Chip's Corner is next. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Chip Flory joining us for Chip's Corner. Chip, you are a road warrior lately. You're on the road again this week. I think you're on the Sustainable Ranchers Tour. Where are you?
Yeah, down in Stillwater, Oklahoma, the campus of Oklahoma State University and Bertram Cattle Company down here in Stillwater. So down here learning about what it takes to make beef sustainable. And really what we're finding out is that beef is a sustainable food. We just need to tell the story better. As a matter of fact, I had a chance to tell that story to USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack. We got around to talking about the Farm Bill, and Secretary Vilsack, I got to believe that Chairwoman Stabenow and Chairman Thompson are both looking for Secretary Vilsack to provide some commentary on how the Farm Bill is moving forward. And I asked Secretary Vilsack if he had a message for the chairs as they continue this negotiation.
Get realistic. Make sure that the expectations are right-sized with the limited resource constrained environment we're in. I mean, I'm dealing with reduced budgets. So, like on the one hand, you're reducing budgets. On the other hand, you're saying we can put $53 billion of additional. I mean, the math doesn't work. So let's make sure expectations are appropriate, and then let's be creative. Let's figure out, creative ways to use CCC. Let's move the money into the Farm Bill, but do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize the climate smart aspect of it. Let's look at ways in which we can be more efficient with some of the programs. Let's be creative about this.
Yeah, let's be creative. That is a very consistent message that has been coming from Secretary Vilsack for months. Number one, be creative. Now, I think Stabenow and Thompson have both been very creative in looking for sources of funding for the Farm Bill, whether it be to beef up the reference prices in Title I or to maintain and expand the supports that are coming through the SNAP program. Both have been creative on that front. And when it comes to the be realistic comment, CBO has scored the bill much higher at a much higher cost than what I think either the Senate Ag Committee or the House Ag Committee is budgeted for at this point. But I got to believe that there are some corn growers, soybean growers, wheat growers out there that are saying, yeah, get realistic. Look at what our costs have done. The reference prices and a 5% increase on those reference prices doesn't provide the safety net that the Farm Bill Title I is supposed to provide. So maybe there's a bit of a get realistic comment coming back at the negotiators on this bill too.
Great for him to join. I know that you've had some good conversations on that Sustainable Ranchers Tour. Chip, thank you for taking time to join us. You can catch Chip Flory weekdays at 10 a.m. Central for AgriTalk AM, 2 p.m. Central for AgriTalk PM. All right, we need to take a quick break. And then when we come back, what if I told you that one producer in Michigan cut his chemical usage by 60%? I mean, mind-blowing. How did he do it? We're going to talk about that in driving technology next.
Driving Technology on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by John Deere. No matter where your operation is with technology, John Deere can help you take the next step. Keep your farm moving forward with John Deere tech to fit your equipment and your operation.
Welcome back. Well, we talk about farming by the field or the acre, but what if you could farm by the plant? That's exactly what artificial intelligence is allowing some in ag to already do. This weekend, we kick off a new series called Driving Technology, and we head to Michigan, where one producer has seen substantial savings in his chemical costs, and it's opening the door for other opportunities on the farm.
Settled just south of Holland, Michigan,
Corn's not here, it's tall here.
it's always busy on Scenic View Dairy. But this time of year, between the 2,000 head of cows being milked and the crops in the field, it's bustling.
They look pretty good this year. They had a little bit of a slow start with a cooler spring.
Brian Geerling says it was a wet spring, which caused planting to see a bit of a delay. But his other biggest challenge as a dairy producer here are recent state-added regulations and labor.
It seems like after the COVID pandemic that couldn't get people to work quite as well. Pricing has been a challenge. There's been ups and downs. It's not a lot of fun when you can't pay your bills, and that weighs heavy on us when we can't. And so pricing matters a lot in those situations. So lately, the last year or so, it's been good. So that feels better.
Scenic View Dairy is serious about milking cows, pumping close to 40 million pounds a day. But just ask Geerlings, this operation is much more than a dairy farm.
We've done several things in the last 20 years, anaerobic digesters, drones for spraying, and now this See and Spray technology with John Deere that I think have been very valuable. There are other things that we've looked at, other technologies that we've passed on because they didn't seem to be a good fit for our farm or a good ROI or payback.
Instead of buying a new sprayer, this dairy opted for a used sprayer and added a precision upgrade kit with See and Spray.
We're working with some weeds that are resistant. It's really no secret that those are out there. And so we have a couple that are a problem for us. And so we really wanted to be able to control cost. The weed isn't widespread. It's in areas or spots in the field. To broadcast spray the entire field would have been very costly.
He says some spray programs can cost anywhere from $20 to $30 per acre. But by being able to see and only spray the weeds in a field, it's producing a savings even bigger than what he imagined.
On a couple fields that I was spraying last week, we saw, I think on the one field I was seeing 26% area applied, and then on another field it was around 43%. So there are higher fields with with a higher pressure. Either case, it's still worth it, right? I save 60% in that case.
He says he's cut his chemicals by 60% in some fields, even more in others.
No, I think we were going to be happy if it was 50%. We're pretty much exceeding what we were hoping for, which obviously makes it pay even more, right? So it's really, really working well.
That savings even caught their local dealer by surprise.
He showed us some maps, and he was at 34% in this one field of applied, so saving a significant amount.
And field by field, that savings is adding up.
I think this is a big game changer for what we're going to see in the future. Just to have chemical savings in this, and then the yield benefit behind just spraying just those certain spots with a more effective chemical.
Geerlings says watching it work in the field has been impressive.
It's amazing that the cameras that are on the booms are seeing weeds that I can't see as an operator, right? These machines are so wide nowadays, they're 120 feet wide. So from the seat, you have to be able to see 60 feet each direction. And to be able to see weeds that are an inch tall or less at times, you can't possibly do a good job spot spraying. I've been really impressed with watching the different nozzles fire on and off as the cameras see the weeds.
That's how it works. Each camera serves as a set of eyes, finding weeds so small that not even Geerlings or their sprayer operator can see from the cab.
So it's got cameras along the boom, and it's looking ahead of it and seeing the weed that it's there and just applying just to the weed, just across there, just across the 120-foot boom.
For a dairy that sets close to Lake Michigan, the savings isn't just coming in costs, but also being even more environmentally friendly than they already are.
My dad always said farmers are the first environmentalists. And so it really fits in with our philosophy of not trying to use more than we have to.
Solid savings and uncovering even more opportunities in every field. It just may be why Scenic View Dairy truly is cutting edge.
That technology really is impressive. All right, when we come back, a wild and unusual chase in California. That story's next. Okay, this is hilarious. Pork producers know what it's like when those little piglets break free, but one precocious piglet in California gave police the old shaken bacon recently. Take a look. Police in Sebastopol received multiple reports of a piglet running in and out of a highway. When they arrived, they found a little piglet who they said proved to be very fast and very strong for its size. Officers and several other folks joining in on the chase following the pet piglet, named Pickles, by the way, for several city blocks until Pickles was finally cornered in a yard about 30 minutes after the chase began. Pickles was later reunited with its mom at the scene. Police elected not to charge Pickles with resisting an officer or for hogging city resources. Moral of the story, don't have a pet pig. All right, that's all the time we have for this weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm actually taking some time off next week, taking vacation, so Clinton Griffiths will be joining you next weekend, and we hope that you can join us as we work here at U.S. Farm Report to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.